What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Kraven's Last Hunt, right? We technically started it and didn't finish it. In the last video that we did, Kraven the Hunter basically killed Spider-Man, right? He considered Peter Parker to kind of be like the ultimate test, right? The ultimate hunt, hence the name Kraven's Last Hunt. What he does in this video is he becomes Spider-Man. Now, there's a really cool narrative that kind of runs through this whole thing here, right? Which is to say, once he dons Peter Parker's Spider-Man suit, it's not really about him replacing Spider-Man. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't, right? He says, like, the spider lies in a grave 100 miles from here, down in the darkness, blasted into oblivion by my hand, because he literally shot him in the face with a shotgun, or at least shot him in the chest with a shotgun. My greatest enemy, my greatest tormentor, that black, hideous, beautiful beast, by my hand. But it's not enough to simply destroy him. I must become him. I must prove myself superior to him and laugh in the face of his hovering ghost. So one of the things to know about the relationship between Kraven and Spider-Man is that it's not your typical like Spider-Man versus Dr. Octopus type relationship or something along those lines. In a lot of ways, the stories of Kraven the Hunter in Marvel Comics very much mirror The Most Dangerous Game, if you guys ever read that book. It's basically the classic story where a guy invites people to his island or kidnaps them and takes them to his island, and then he hunts them, right? Because he considers man to be the most dangerous form of game that he can possibly hunt. Kraven is very much like that in relation to Spider-Man. And while I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say that he saw Spider-Man as a kind of god, what he did do is see Spider-Man as this almost undefeatable being, right? This person that if he were to overcome him and then basically become the spider, it would be like the greatest achievement in his life, because as a hunter, it's what he lives for. But what he does is he tells himself, once he enters into this place, he says, no, I am Kraven the man. I am Kraven the Hunter, and my metamorphosis is not yet complete. My metamorphosis, I must merge with the spider, with its blasphemous sacred essence. Now, the cool thing about this is that while I doubt it was the intention of Marvel and JMD Mateus at the time this story was written, this very much feeds into the work of J. Michael Straczynski when it came to like the other in the Spider-Man comics, which is to say the whole idea of spider totems and so on and so forth, the nature of Spider-Man and like the inheritors and so on and so forth. This idea that Peter Parker as Spider-Man is representative of basically animal totems, right? He represents the spider in the entire spider landscape, different powers and abilities that effectively come with it. But for Kraven, his metamorphosis, right, his transformation into the spider is basically confronting his fear of the spider. So one of the things you guys will probably notice, because this story came out way back in the day, it shares a lot of similarities with Batman and Bane, right? Like Bane literally left Santa Prisca and then tracked down Batman in Gotham City because he was having quote unquote nightmares about a bat, and defeating Batman would conquer those nightmares and kind of elevate him to a greater level as far as he was concerned in his own mind. With Kraven, it's very much the same way, right? He says like, don't question, drink herbs and roots and juices, poisons, fruits, and flowers. Let them pervade your mind, widen it, shatter your cravenness, and let in spiderness. Let it in, let in pain. So it's one of these things where for him, not only is it about just like taking over the role of Spider-Man, or at least kind of replacing Spider-Man to a degree, although not necessarily, it's becoming the spider, this almost mythical entity that exists out there, elevating himself to an almost godlike status and all the powers and all that kind of stuff that comes with it. The crazy thing here is that once he does this, of course, he experiences pain, but then in turn, he starts to have what you could argue to be this massive hallucination. Now, given the fact that it is Marvel Comics, and Marvel Comics is really nothing more than just kind of flights of fancy in both written and drawn form, you could say that like this giant spider is actually happening. But at the same time, it really seems more just due to him hallucinating, right? To kind of hallucinogens and so on and so forth. But he's physically fighting it and physically engaging it because this is representative of the thing that terrifies him, right? This great, powerful, beastly spider that exists out there, this force that's always defeated him at every single turn. If he can conquer this, he can become the greatest hunter who's ever lived, the greatest thing in his own mind. And so that's why Kraven's Last Hunt is as much a psychological story as it is a Spider-Man story. It's arguably the greatest Spider-Man story ever written, depending on how you look at it, but nonetheless, it still kind of falls in that way. Now, what it does here for a second is it it does transition to Mary Jane Watson in the sense that like some guys are basically hassling her and really harassing her and that kind of thing. She tells them off and really kind of walks away. And then it jumps back to Kraven. That's an important thing because we're going to circle back around to that here in a second. But even Kraven himself in the midst of all of this says like, this is insane. I stand before a shadow that doesn't exist, a shadow created by my own drugged mind. There's nothing to fear. I am Kravenoff, the hunter man. There is no spider, no supernatural creature that inhabits men's souls. There is only Spider-Man, a costumed adventurer who, through sheer luck, has managed to beat me time and again down through the years. But it's also one of these things where he's kind of like, none of this is real. He literally kind of muses and says, but now I have finally beaten him and I want to magnify that defeat. Only by taking his place, by proving myself superior to him, by proving myself a better Spider-Man, can my victory have any completeness, any meaning? So for those of you guys who have been reading Spider-Man for a number of years, and specifically during Dan Slott's run, obviously Superior Spider-Man has very big notes when it comes to this. Why? Because the motivation of Dr. Octopus in basically taking over the body of Peter Parker in that story and becoming Spider-Man was rooted in this very thing. I will become the new Spider-Man. I will become a better Spider-Man. So that's one of the reasons why Kraven's Last Hunt is such a landmark story in Marvel Comics when it comes to the Spider-Man mythos, because in a lot of ways, it informed so many other stories that came after it, decades after this came out. Other stories built off the work that it did. And so this is when Kraven really starts to take control of the situation, and he says, yet I insist on creating this thing, this spider. I cannot face the fact that a man was capable of besting me. We'll stand up then and we'll face him. But what if it's true? And so it's one of these things where it kind of feeds on this idea, what if Spider-Man is just like some kind of mythological being, right? Like what if Peter is representative of some kind of mythological power that exists out there? Hence the nature of JMD Mateus is like the other, so on and so forth, right? Peter Parker embodying this mythological spider type being and turning into quite literally a giant spider himself. What if that's true? What if this is really the case? What if Spider-Man is not just a kid out there who got his powers by whatever manner and whatever means, because Kraven doesn't fully know the origin of Spider-Man. Nobody really does, at least outside of Peter and the people that he's chose to divulge that to. But what if it's not just that, right? What if he really is this just mythological character? And so that's what's so cool about this, is it gives you insight into the mind of how Kraven sees Spider-Man. He wants to believe that Spider-Man is just a kid who is a superhero and has defeated him several times. But on the other hand, there's the possibility that maybe there's something else. And a lot of that is because when it comes to Kraven the Hunter, the notion of like gods and mysticism and beings of crazy powers and all that kind of stuff, that's not like a major part of his character, right? He's by no means tied into like the Midnight Suns and Doctor Strange and Ghost Rider or anything like that. But there is this almost kind of supernatural viewpoint of the various things that he hunts. So it is really interesting to see him see Peter Parker in that way. Now, ultimately, he's kind of like just completely engulfed by like these spiders that are just kind of overtaking him and so on and so forth. But he does end up escaping from all of them, right? Like overcoming his fear. And that's when you switch back to Mary Jane Watson, because these two guys that she basically told off, they start following her. And as they continue to follow her, eventually Spider-Man shows up. Now she's excited to see him because she doesn't know that Spider-Man has been shot by Kraven the Hunter and he's buried underground 100 miles away. She just sees that Spider-Man is there. But her immediate indication that it's not Peter Parker comes in the form of the fact that when Kraven fights these guys, he is brutal towards them. I mean, he beats them within an inch of their life and almost kills one of them, right? Way more damage than Spider-Man would ever do, because Peter Parker would like try to scare them off, or maybe he would web them up and stick them to a wall, but he certainly wouldn't practically beat them to death, right? Or nearly beat them to death. That just wouldn't happen. And that level of ferocity and that level of anger and rage, right? Just that kind of deadly nature coming from this situation immediately tells MJ, this is not Peter. And she's actually going to become kind of a major player in the future of Kraven's Last Hunt in terms of tracking down and figuring out what's going on with Peter Parker. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. If you want to get caught up on Kraven's Last Hunt, make sure you click this link to the playlist so you can watch the first video, and I will catch you all later. Peace.